Thanks very much for staying with us. Time now for Eye on Africa with me, Georgia Calvin-Smith. Tonight, Burkina Faso's military junta will be in power for 3 years before holding elections. Political, civil society and religious leaders take part in days of talks before coming up with the post-coup plan. Also, a fourth witness testifies to the ICC that Kenyan lawyer Paul Gicheru offered him a bribe to withdraw his testimony against Kenya's Vice President William Ruto. And digital technologies are supercharging an industrial change across Africa, and we hear from the founder of AfricaNXT, one of the biggest tech innovation conferences on the continent, going on right now in Lagos. But first, Burkina Faso's military junta will stay in power for 3 years before elections are held. After days of national consultations, committees and talks with leaders, they've come up with the timeline for the transition. President Roch-Marc Kabore was overthrown in January amidst mounting frustration over a rise in extremist attacks. Shirley Sitman has more.
International bodies had called for a speedy transition from military rule to Burkina Faso's next elections. The approved timetable is longer than they had hoped. 3 years during which the junta that took power late January has vowed to bring back security. Burkina Faso has faced in recent years a growing number of terrorist attacks from gunmen linked to Al-Qaeda and the Islamic State group. Some delegates say 3 years to make the country safe is not excessive.
Il ne faut pas rapidement faire une transition et puis remettre le pouvoir aux politiciens qui ont contribué à baisser la tête du Burkina Faso actuellement.
One of the things still unknown is how Burkina Faso's international partners will react. After the coup, it lost some international financial support.
Comme c'est technique, nous ne sommes pas des spécialistes de la défense. Nous espérons que cela ne va pas créer des heurts avec nos partenaires.
Some experts believe that a long transition could allow the military to cement their grasp on power. But the idea of an approved transition plan is seen as a positive step.
Look now at some news in brief. The first group of 17 Ghanaian students arrived home on Tuesday after having been flown out of Ukraine. Around 500 Ghanaian nationals are expected to be brought back as African nations rush to get nationals out of the Eastern European war zone. Nigeria said that it will use chartered planes to start evacuating more than 1,500 of its citizens from countries around Ukraine. From Wednesday, more than 16,000 African students had been studying in Ukraine when it was invaded by Russia last week. For the first time since May 2020, South Africa's recorded no COVID-19 deaths for 2 days. Health authorities made the announcement on Tuesday. On the continent, the country's been the hardest hit by the pandemic. The news has sparked cautious optimism, and the decline in fatalities has been put down to both the rollout of vaccines and the immunity caused in the population by past waves of infection. And Nigerian citizens living abroad will not be allowed to vote in national elections. On Tuesday, the country's Senate voted to reject proposed changes to the constitution that would have allowed the Nigerian diaspora a say in presidential and parliamentary polls, which are due next February. About 1.7 million Nigerians are thought to have been living outside of the country in 2020. Now, a fourth witness testified on Monday that Kenyan lawyer Paul Gicheru offered him a bribe to withdraw his testimony. Now, that trial is still ongoing. The lawyer is currently facing charges at the International Criminal Court for bribing and intimidating prosecution witnesses in a case against Kenya's Vice President William Ruto, who's accused of stoking ethnic violence after a disputed 2007 election. The case collapsed 6 years ago for lack of evidence, but the prosecution could revive it if Gicheru is found guilty. Our correspondent Caroline Kimeo tells us more.
4 out of 6 witnesses have come forward so far to testify in the case against Kenyan lawyer Paul Gicheru. Now, it's not looking good for the Kenyan attorney as yet another witness makes bribery allegations against him. The witness said that the lawyer offered him roughly 4,000 euros to drop his testimony against Deputy President William Ruto in the ICC trial against him, and more if he came with other witnesses. Now, the prosecution has dealt a strong hand so far with its witness testimony, and these are damning allegations against Gicheru, who the prosecution says was key in obstructing their case against the deputy president for crimes against humanity committed in the wake of the disputed 2007 presidential elections. Now, the incident saw 1,000 Kenyans lose their lives, and it's one that's etched in the country's memory. So it's resurfacing at a critical moment for Deputy President Ruto as he is set to run for president in the August 2022 elections. And while the ICC did drop the charges against the deputy president, it did not acquit him, and should Gicheru be found guilty, the prosecution could choose to revive the charges against him. What we can expect to see in coming weeks and months is for the prosecution to present additional witnesses as well as documentary evidence that Gicheru was involved in witness coercion.
Now, digital technologies are supercharging an industrial change across Africa. The continent's still got a way to go to take full advantage of its talent and young markets, but African innovators from all kinds of sectors are consciously chasing and shaping progress on that front. So this week, the AfricaNXT conference is being held in Lagos. It brings together tens of thousands of people from across the continent focused on scaling up new and creative ways of doing things. Now, their reimaginings are often tech-based, but not always. We are joined now by its founder, Ngozi Odita, who speaks to us from Lagos. Ngozi, thanks very much for speaking to us. So you've had a lot of big names at the table at the event in the past: Facebook, YouTube, Microsoft. Why do you think that big tech companies like this see value in being partnered with a conference focused on African innovation?
I think that because we bring, you mentioned kind of like innovation, we bring like young people to the table. And when I say young, it's anybody from, 18 to in their 30s. And it's really often when you go to conferences, especially on the continent, the attendees skew very old. They skew older, and you don't often hear like kind of the younger voices that are really on the ground, like innovating, that are launching startups, that are running music companies, like all the industries where you're seeing innovation happening. Often those people are not at these conferences that are happening across the continent, but at our conference is one place you can go to and see a cross-section of young people, but then you also see other stakeholders within industries. So I think that diverse mix of people and sectors is really what brings a lot of tech companies to come. And then just also the fact that so much is happening across the continent, from hearing about all the fintechs that are being invested in, and then just hearing about just how different industries and what's happening. I think there's a huge interest from the music to technology to the fashion that a lot of people have their eyes on what's happening on the continent and want to figure out the best way.
So is it all just about tech? I mean, we're talking about innovation, but surely that there's a need to do things differently, not just in the tech sector.
I think definitely. I think oftentimes we don't want to get just thinking about one sector. I think for a long time, especially with Nigeria and other oil producing countries, you see highly focusing on one sector. And then if, things, don't work out or there's a decline, then you kind of have your eggs all in one basket. So I think that we look broadly at innovation. So you'll see young people who are farmers who are looking at different ways of farming. Like we had a farmer come from like the north and talked about soilless farming and teaching people other ways to like farm and grow crops and not having to rely on the soil. Then you have like fashion designers who are talking about how they're collaborating across borders in order to like scale their business. So it's really just looking at new approaches, right? So innovation can be technology, but it's also just bringing a new approach and a new idea. And that's really what the conference is rooted in. Like, what new ideas are we bringing forward that are going to really shape what happens next?
And is this just for and about Africa, or is what's being discussed relevant beyond the conference, the continent?
I think it's relevant, everywhere. We attract not just Africans, but many people across the diaspora. We have people who come from the US, from across Europe. We've had people come from Asia. So I think it's I think what people are most interested in is what is happening on the ground and how we are solving problems. And I think the reality is that the problems that are happening on the continent are happening everywhere, whether it's scarcity of resources, that's not exclusive to the continent, insecurity or, conflict is happening everywhere. And I think, throughout the pandemic, we saw just how similar we can be in situations and things that arise. So I think people come to the conference just trying to see what ideas are happening, what are young Africans doing, and is it applicable other places? And I think it definitely is applicable in other places.
Just quickly, now, innovation's always happened. It's what moves things forward. What is new about innovation in Africa now?
I think that, young people are really very much interested in a new future and setting a new path for themselves. Often, young people are kind of tired of going without or not having political leaders kind of address their pressing issues. Youth unemployment is so high across the continent, and I think young people are want to do things on their own terms. And technology and innovating and collaboration gives them an opportunity to say, now what can I do for myself? How can I find my way? Often across the continent, it's not like other places. There are not a lot of social safety nets. You have to achieve, you have to make it. And you often can't do it on your own. So you collaborate to get further.
Ngozi Odita, thank you so much. Wish you the very best of luck with the rest of the conference, AfricaNXT. That is, though, all we have time for on Eye on Africa. Do stay with us, though. Short break, more news and headlines from around the world coming up.
Breaking news on France 24 and France24.com.